Analysis. The Moffat era. What went wrong? The Stephen Moffat era of Doctor Who came to an end on the 25th of December 2017, nearly 8 years after it began in early 2010. The era began after the period known as the Russell T Davies era, which had revived the series 5 years earlier after being off the air as a regular television program for nearly 15 years and had been a massive commercial success, even if not always to the taste of many fans of the original program. There is no denying, however, that Moffat inherited a popular and commercial success, but despite a very promising start consisting of the best companion the revived series had yet seen in the shapely form of Karen Gillan's Amy Pond, and a new Doctor initially characterized more in the mold of his classic series predecessors than any other as yet seen in the modern show, as well as a very promising first season that made the most of its new leads and saw a return to atmosphere after years of the rather glib Davies version, things began to rapidly go downhill for the new era of the program. Behind-the-scenes problems caused Series 6 to be split in two across 2011, and the issues were very much obvious on screen. In spite of the still enjoyable regular characters and a number of entertaining standalone adventures such as Night Terrors, The God Complex and The Girl Who Waited, Moffat's decision to have a more arc-heavy season than ever before did not pay off, confusing many casual viewers and irritating many non-casual viewers with the arc's general silliness and an emphasis on plotting cleverness that had no time for characterization. The River Song is Amy and Rory's daughter plot twist was batshit ridiculous, not only turning the formerly mildly intriguing character of River into a complete joke, but even severely harming the credibility of the new show's best companions, Amy and Rory, by essentially just having them react to the loss of their newborn daughter with an area shrug of the shoulder and then just carry on like nothing untoward had taken place. However, if Series 6 had taken an alarming downturn, it was nothing compared to what was to come. Series 7, again split but this time over 2 years, was a disaster in every sense of the word. One of the worst seasons in the program's history, with a collection of scripts each of which seemed to be worse than the one before. The season saw the departure of Amy and Rory and the arrival of Clara Oswald, played by Jenna Coleman. If the best modern Who companion had left, her replacement would prove to be by far the worst. In her first season, Clara essentially has no character, a blank slate presumably to allow for the mystery aspect of her rather clumsy and uninteresting Impossible Girl story arc to play out, but which essentially made the character one-dimensional and impossible to care about. Certainly ratings began to sink for the first time noticeably during the second half of the season, suggesting that the casual audience may have not only preferred Amy and Rory to Clara but possibly even to Smith's Doctor, whose characterization by this time had also degenerated alarmingly from the mildly quirky but believably professorial classic-style Doctor of his first season into a full-on gibbering punchable imbecile by this point. 2013 also saw the 50th anniversary special, Day of the Doctor, which managed to briefly revive dwindling mainstream interest but was a pretty piss-poor effort on every other level, essentially a shameless ego-driven circle jerk of the new series with minimum interest in paying homage to the original, and far superior in every conceivable way, program. The end of the year also saw the departure of Matt Smith and the arrival of Moffat's second Doctor, Peter Capaldi. Capaldi's arrival divided fandom still further. Many classic fans, including myself, were very positive about an older actor being given the part again, something many of us cynics thought would never happen these days, but a certain breed of new Who fan, particularly the fangirl brigade whose primary interest was in swooning over David Tennant and Matt Smith, were less than thrilled. Nonetheless, not all new Who fans were like that, and many of us older viewers were hoping that the casting was a statement of intent to try and take the program back to the more mature classic Who style. It didn't quite work out that way. Any hope that the scripting, which had fallen to abysmal levels in Series 7, would step up to the plate of having an accomplished actor in the lead role was well and truly wrecked by Series 8, another prime candidate for the worst season in the history of the show. If the awful scripts weren't bad enough, Capaldi failed to impress me and some other fans, and an initial spike in the ratings for the new Doctor failed to bring back the mainstream viewers who had been so enraptured by the Davis formula. Her mystery over, Clara needed to get a character at last, but unfortunately Stephen Moffat chose to make her a rather nasty, selfish, know-it-all, of the highest order who in true hypocritical modern Western society style, believed that physically assaulting a man for disagreeing with Her Highness was somehow acceptable behavior. And indeed this is where something even more concerning began to happen to the new series. While the modern show had always pandered to the female demographic, often at the expense of the young male audience the classic series had predominantly appealed to, the new series here began to become more and more blatantly anti-male. Clara's abuse of the new Doctor, together with Capaldi's Doctor questioning his status as a good man for, no apparent reason, and then the decision to castrate the Master with the ridiculous joke character that was Missy, all began pointing to the series now pandering to a very different, and even more fucked up, demographic, the man-hating Tumblr-right audience. The fact that a story that reveals the Master has lost his willy is also a story that literally dregs up the corpse of one of the show's most loved male characters, the Brigadier, and makes him into a zombie Cyberman, just about made many classic fans turn off altogether, including me. I stopped watching the series at this point, and the only reason I relented on this decision and eventually caught up on Series 9 just prior to Series 10 was for the sake of reviewing them for my channel. Having seen Series 9, I can't say I was overly sorry to have missed it on transmission. Another dire season, more dire scripts, and yet again I just couldn't warm to Capaldi, who appeared to have been recharacterized as a wacky Doctor after audience disinterest in his cold and aloof previous Series 8 version. And audience figures, and mainstream audience interest, continued to fall. Series 10 was a mild improvement in some ways, certainly as Bill, while hardly great, was considerably less obnoxious than Clara. They finally hit on a persona for Capaldi, a sort of mad professor type, that actually worked to a reasonable degree, and there were even a handful of decent stories. But it wasn't enough to save the era. The Moffat era came to an end with Twice Upon a Time, one final desecration of a formerly great program. Moffat had come to be seen as a showrunner whose decisions pissed off fans, but not as a byproduct, as had sometimes been the case with his predecessors, but actually as an intent. Moffat seemed to delight in pissing off older fans, and here his contempt for a subsection of his own audience, and the program he had been entrusted with for 7 years, fully revealed itself in one final act of utterly disgusting revisionism, falsely characterizing an, awfully cosplayed by David Bradley, first Doctor stand-in as a sexist pig. There is no more greater evidence of Moffat's utter contempt for the real character of the Doctor, the real program or fans of any version of the program other than that of him and his mates than this travesty. And while the controversial casting of a woman as the 13th Doctor was not his choice, Moffat did his best to make it as unpalatable as possible with the ridiculous retcon bullshit that Time Lords have been gender benders the whole time. Fucking ridiculous. Not only is it clearly false, but it even makes his bullshit sexist character assassination of the first Doctor even more nonsensical. Why would anyone from a society where gender doesn't count, according to his own writing, have any sexist feelings toward either gender? Answers on a fucking postcard. It makes no sense, because that's Moffat all over. For all the whining directed at Moffat by some saddos on the internet screaming at how sexist he is to women, the only actual sexism on display in the Moffat era has been in its latter stages, and firmly directed at men. All in all, the Moffat era was a train wreck. It started off coming off the back of an amazingly successful revival, and ends having divided fandom and alienated much of the mainstream audience his predecessor had worked so tirelessly to attract. It is astonishing to realize how much of the Curse of Fatal Death, a late 90s comic skit intended as a ridiculous parody of the original series, came to pass in New Who, and particularly in the Moffat era, essentially confirming what many fans of the original series have long felt, that the new series is nothing more than a parody itself. I am not a fan of the Davis era, but the Moffat era has been an even bigger disaster and may have well put a bigger and more final nail in the coffin of Doctor Who than either Michael Grade or Jonathan Powell ever could. And as much as I like Series 5, Matt Smith and Karen Gillan, they are certainly not enough to prevent this showrunner's era from getting anything other than an F.